Welcome back to our channel. I'm Carol with Stolen Stitches, and today we are diving into color. Color is one of my favorite techniques, and it's a really easy way of adding interest to your knitting, and it can be done in either more complex or very simple and straightforward ways. So whether you're a brand new knitter or maybe you're more experienced, we are going to start at the beginning with some of the more well-known ways of putting color into your knitting, and we're going to work through lots of different things that you can do. So by the time we're done with the video, you'll have lots of inspiration and lots of techniques that you can use to add color to your knitting. So we're going to start with the first one that is probably the best known, which would be stranded color work. Now, when people think of color work, that is often the first thing that they're going to think of. It would be a technique that's used in Fair Isle knitting, where you're using more than one color in a row. Typically, it's going to be two colors, but sometimes you may see three colors even used. There are lots of different ways of adding them, of doing the actual technique. You may opt to hold both colors in one hand and then just knit whichever one that is required for that part in the chart. Or the technique that I find I use, and it's very straightforward and makes it kind of a little bit easier to keep track of each color, is to teach yourself to knit with yarns in both hands. So you've got background color in your right hand and the pattern color in your left, and then you just work your way through the chart. Stranded color work is always going to be worked in the round, almost always. There are cases where it's worked flat, but it's more traditionally or more standardly done in the round because it's much more straightforward. And the reason it's known as stranded is because the color you're not using, you pull a strand of it behind the other color. So that's how it becomes known as stranded. I suppose the main tip I would give for working it is try to practice working with both hands, because it is definitely the easiest way of working it once you get used to that technique. And the biggest tip I would give to actually start improving your stranded color work is really watch those floats. Make sure you don't pull them too tightly, because if you pull them tight, you're going to get a puckering effect and you'll never get your stranded color work to lay flat. So I've got a pattern idea for you to look at here. This is the Umore sweater. And Umore is done in an Aran weight, so it's a little thicker, it's going to work up a bit faster, and it's knit from the top down. And the increases are actually worked into the chart. So the stitches you start up at the top here are going to increase down the bottom, which would be fairly typical for stranded color work charts, that the increases for the yoke are all going to be worked in. So there's only one small portion of color work, so this is an ideal beginner project. You can also start perhaps with hats for a smaller project if you want to just have a little one to begin with. But I would go for kind of cowls or hats or sweaters like this, because you want to have a slightly larger circumference, because that makes it much easier to work. Smaller ones are trickier, like mitts and socks, because of the fact that you will have the potential for it to be puckered along the sides. So the next technique we'll be looking at will be slip stitch color work, and it can sometimes be mistaken for stranded color work because it can look quite similar. But the difference being you're only ever going to be working a single color on each row. The stitches that you want in the different color, you're going to be slipping. So as you work across, the colors with the different color, or the colors that are not in the row worked, will just be slipped, usually with the yarn at the back of the work. But there are situations where you might perhaps have the colors slipped in the front, which would actually mean that you're then getting kind of interesting pattern work and texture, as well as working the two colors. The neon skyline here is a fairly good example of that, where there's panels of stranded color work where it's worked in garter stitch. So this is also known as mosaic knitting, which is just a variant of stranded Colourwork, but it's done one that's worked in garter stitch. So it's knit on the right and the wrong side row. So you can then just pull up different colors and create very, very interesting, intricate looking stitches. But the wonderful thing about it is that if you were brand new to Colourwork, it is not very difficult to work because you're not having to deal with the two colors and actually figuring out how to work them together and put one in front and all the rest of it. So much, much more straightforward. So the Neon Skyline is a nice version of that. I've done it in hats and in some other smaller examples like that as well, but it'll often be combined with blocks of different color, stripes of the two color together, and then pulling the stranded Colourwork in. So keep an eye out for stranded Colourwork and mosaic if you want a nice, easy way of pulling in different stripes of color into your knitting, but having it a lot more subtle but easy to work. So a great, great intro to Colourwork. Now, the item number 3 that I think is probably one of my favorite of adding color into your knitting is what I'm wearing here, is stripes. Stripes are the most straightforward way of adding different colors together because you can do them in very, very subtle or very bold, depending on how wide the stripes are, how much contrast you have between the two colors, or whether you keep it a very even pattern with repeats, or whether you've got something perhaps where it gradiates from one color to another. So working stripes doesn't require any more technique than a standard stockinette stitch or garter stitch or whatever you're working in. You just need to think through and have ideas of to how to put the colors together. Now, one thing you can actually do is if you've got a ruler or a piece of cardboard and you want to see how different stripe patterns work, you can just go ahead and wrap yarn around, like in wider or narrower bands, to get a feel for what it's going to look like as you start putting those repeats together. So something like that can be very, very helpful for being able to visualize what it looks like, particularly if you're adding in more than two colors like this. If you want to add in, you know, lots of small narrow colors as they go through, it'll really, it can really help you picture what it looks like. So there's also there's a couple of different ways then that you can do stripes and some ideas for patterns. The heli pattern is one where you've got very, very tiny single row stripes, but this hat uses what's something called helical stripes, where you're continually spiraling, and as you go from one color to another, you slip between a couple of stitches between. So there's never going to be a point where you're always swapping between the two. It's always jogging just 3 stitches at a time. So as you're going through, it very, very smoothly runs from one to another. And so you've got just one round with each color alternating through. In this particular one, the heli pattern is a free pattern on the website, and it's designed to teach you how to work helical stripes. But all I did with this is there was a series of leftover yarn I had. So I just made a little skein where I joined each of the color leftovers I had together in 2 balls. And then I alternated with helical stripes going through it so that it varies between, like, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 different colors in this hat, but they're all blended in together using helical stripes and just doing a seamless join between each of those different colors. So if you want to learn helical stripes and single color stripes, this is a good one to go with. This cardigan it's a newer pattern called Trio of Light, and it's one where I wanted to have a lovely bright contrast color but I didn't want just single stripes. So I've just got this pattern of 3 narrower stripes with a wider band between them and just repeated that up. So you can see that when you just pick your color stripe pattern that you want, and once you start repeating that through, it becomes it's a pattern in its own right, and you can incorporate it into any part of your knitting. You could, if you wanted to, with each of these, if you had several different colors, you could actually have each of those in 3 different colors and then repeat those through, or perhaps you've got color blocks in between. So with stripes, it's also a lovely way of incorporating perhaps different colors you've got, or if you want to do color blocks or didn't have a huge amount of one particular color, you can use the stripes to break between and then graduate from one color to another as you're going through. So stripes give you a really nice, I suppose, cohesive way of joining lots of different colors together if that's what you wanted to do. And this brings us to the fourth and final colorwork style that I wanted to talk to you about today, and that is double knitting colorwork. And double knitting colorwork is probably one of the trickier methods. It takes a little more time consuming than stranded because it's exactly as it sounds. It's double knitting where you've got one color on one side that is the main color with the second one as the background. And then when you flip it over, it's mirror image of the colors that were on the other side, but with the same stitch pattern. I've got an example of it here from Emer Early. This is the Crinna cowl. It's a buttoned double length cowl. And this is the stitch pattern on this side, but when you flip it over, you can see that it's the same stitch pattern, but the colors are inverted. And those are all worked every row so that the ones in between you're knitting the one on the one side, you bring your colors in front, and then you're purling the one from the other side. So you're working 2 layers at once, and it's double layer, very thick, very warm, and it lies lovely and flat. But it is slower and it's time consuming, but the end result is truly, truly stunning. So I've given you a whistle dash tour of color work here in this video. So where we've gone through stranded color work, slip stitch color work, stripes, and double knitting. So you can see how there's lots of different ways of introducing color into your knitting. If you've tried some of these, but not all of them, I'd encourage you to give it a go, whether it's a swatch or something bigger, and figure out if you've got a favorite or if there's something that really enhances your knitting and you really enjoy doing. You can find all of the links to the resources down below, and we've also put together a YouTube playlist all about color work. So all of the links will be down below. If there's anything else you'd like to see from us, just add it to the comments, and thank you for watching.